FLW stop number 3, and we are here at Lake Martin in both central Alabama. I've never ever been to Lake Martin before. I did do a quick run around real quick before we went back to Minnesota to pick up our brand new Lance camper, but this was actually our first event back with that new camper. That was awesome. Everything else, pretty crazy week, you know. COVID-19, coronavirus hit the shores of the U.S. and it hit it in a pretty hard way. I think we got fortunate for us at the FLW in this tournament. We were able to get this one crunched in. We are already all here in Alabama. It kind of all flared up real quick. I think FLW made a great decision in letting us fish and really pulled out all the stops to be able to get us out there and let us do our job safely. You know, we were quarantined. We didn't have marshals in this one. We spend a lot of time outside and away from everybody else, probably the safest place we can be. So for this particular event and everything that they had to do to make it happen, kudos to them to get us on the water. But still, Lake Martin, spotted bass. Spotted bass are generally not my thing. I love them. I love fishing for them. But at the end of the day, they've been a problem for me in the past. You know, every year I seem to, if I take my lumps and that's part of the season, I seem to do well and compete everywhere else, maybe even excel. But when it comes to spotted bass fisheries, I end up paying the price. And this year I was determined. We have a whole bunch of them on our schedule. We're going to Hartwell. It was very important to me that I figured these places out and spent some time at Lanier, learned a few tricks, put some things to the test. Got here to Lake Martin, really it all went out the window. It was kind of a different fishery. Getting bit was absolutely zero problem. It got hot. Everything here at Lake Martin turned into almost summer real quick, which forced a lot of those fish to get on the bank. And I tried deep. Of course, that was my deal. I wanted to catch them out deep. I wanted to use my Lowrance electronics, my Navionics mapping, and get around there and find those different schools of fish and catch them that way. And it just wasn't in the cards. And as practice kept going, I found some fish out deep, real deep actually, like 30, 40, 50 feet. And everywhere in between, all the way up to the bank. You know, it didn't seem like any real rhyme or reason, but if I wasn't getting out there on those schools and catching, you know, 10 out of 15 drops, I really wasn't that interested, especially knowing these fish really had to get up and get on the bank. I did find a few different things. You know, I was fishing some saddles, feeding areas early in the morning where bigger spots were pre-spawn and they were pushing up bait. They were up there, they were feeding, and I was catching them on a Mega Bass Idle Vision +1 jerk bait. This is one of my favorite colors, matte shad. I was throwing this on an X-Pride, a Shimano X-Pride rod. This is like a medium, 7-foot medium, something like that, 610 medium action X-Pride. An Antares reel was perfect setup. I went with straight 10-pound Seeger and Vizex. And the reason why I did that was I was actually having more success if I could get this bait to hit bottom. So I was getting it down actually around 7 foot, something like that on super long casts. When I would hit the top of those shoals or those saddles, I would definitely initiate that strike. And the only other thing I did is I switched out, I put some Owner STX hooks on. That made it, you know, a little bit better for me. Those fish would grab it off the rocks and it kept them pegged. That was probably one of my more better bites. And pre-practice, I also banged some boat docks every now and then. I mean, I'd catch fish like crazy, but every now and then I catch an okay one. And of course, I also utilize the Outcast Tackle Goldeneye, a little swim bait. This is a Biospawn Exo Swim, bright little color. The water was really dirty. So as I started to notice that these fish were pushing the bank, you know, I got down into the area of the lake that I felt had the best concentration of bigger fish and just really tried to make it happen. Towards the last day of practice, I kind of found that the fish were really hitting the bank, but I couldn't catch size. I could catch 100 if I wanted to, but it was tough to catch size. Basically, all I did is threw around a little Ned rig. This is the Outcast Tackle, perfect Ned head, a bait I designed. I kind of doubled up with this. I used this both offshore, around points, around docks, if I saw fish spaghettiing underneath my graph, in my sonar. I actually use, this is a modified bait I'm using. This is a 10,000 fish Sakoshi bug. Generally a cross-style bait. I use it for smallmouth all the time. I'm doing another little video showing you how to modify it, but basically I just cut the appendages off and I got a fat little ribbed bait that still, you know, got that same stretch X, that same stuff that we love that gets that bait to float up. And I caught a lot of fish doing this. Again, I could catch them offshore with that. I could also catch them up on the bank. So for the spinning rods, I was using G Loomis NRX. I don't think there's a better spinning rod. I know there's not a better spinning rod in the market. I was using a 7.3 medium action on all these, and a Shimano Accents 4000 is my deal. 10-pound power pole braid, and I was using 8 or 10-pound test Seeger and Vizex leader. First day of the tournament, I rolled out and I might have caught 60 bass in the first hour and a half. It was crazy. Even though I went out and I caught at least 20 more spots the rest of the day, I was never able to upgrade. I even sacrificed my last 2 hours of the day. Probably should have stayed with the spots in hindsight, but I went largemouth fishing and even caught 4 largies just flipping a tube and bushes and stuff like that. But again, none of them helped. I weighed in day one, I only had a pretty disappointing day, you know, 8 pounds, 15 ounces. To catch that many fish, I never caught that many fish in my life in a tournament, and only have that kind of weight was pretty disappointing. I was in like 105th, 103rd, something like that out of 150. Knew I had to have a big day, but honestly was a little bit discouraged because it was tough in practice for me to find that quality 3-pound bite. Part of me wanted to go all in on largemouth, but I didn't have no success in that in practice anyway. I wanted to stay around numbers. I wanted to catch fish and save face. So anyway, the second day I ended up going out and catching some fish again, got on 30 fish right away in the morning for about a 7-pound limit, and slowly culled throughout the day. And I'd actually seen on live sight some fish sitting out there in front of me. And live sight is something that I utilize a lot in this venue for the fish. I've always kind of said, you know, I'm using live sight to see targets, rocks, brush piles, stuff like that. But with spotted bass, man, I'm really using it to actually see the fish. Again, in hindsight, really wish I just would have depended on that a heck of a lot more. But again, that gives me a big learning curve and stuff that I'm going to continue to do, because if I was trusting it and just utilizing it and not feeling like I had to run around to waypoints and stuff like that where I had caught them before, I really think I'd have cashed a pretty good check in this tournament. Throwing this thing out on those points around those fish, I caught a 3-3 spot, my biggest of the week, a 2-8, and ended up with 10 3/4 pounds. Finished in a tie for 76th, and literally 1 ounce away from getting a paycheck. Would have been like my 6th check in a row or something like that, but it just wasn't meant to be. I am happy I saved a whole bunch of points, and I learned a lot more about spotted bass. I think instead of going to Florida and spending all my time in the Tennessee River or smallie fishing, from now on, Bree and I are just going to have to set up the camper somewhere around these highland reservoirs and just really start to get at them, because I do enjoy fishing for them, and we're always going to hit these kind of venues. So in the end, you know, I'm happy to salvage some points. I think I'm sitting 31st in the overall points, sitting well inside that top 50 cut. You know, Cherokee, our next one coming up, has gotten postponed. They rescheduled that for June. That'll be interesting. And then we got Hartwell coming up after that. So all for now, we don't know what to do. So we'll be hanging out in the camper somewhere, quarantining and just going fishing. Hope all the best for you. Stay safe, everybody. Tight lines.